All right, y'all, welcome back to another Rebooting the Blue. Claire Marie here with Chris Humphreys. Today we are just diving into understanding your window of tolerance. It's first, I do also want to say, like, this isn't medical advice. Um, and neither of us are doctors. The goal of our workshops are education and normalizing just human stuff that we all experience. Really what we're talking about is the concept that we all have max points, right? Whether physical, emotional, we can all hit our maxes. And we just want to normalize that, whether it's, like I said, physical or mental, it's just part of being human. So our newsletter this month, it focused on decision fatigue. And, I don't know if everybody's had a chance to look at that. It's a pretty short article if you get a couple minutes to go give that a read. But just in case, Chris, can you give us a understanding of what decision fatigue is?
Um, yeah, I mean, and especially in relation to like first responders who are sort of decision-making machines, at least for 8 to 10 or maybe, excuse me, 12 hours a day. But then, also in, I mean, just life, right, outside of that. Um, and this is when you start to hear terms like window of tolerance. I
Mhm.
think as we sort of talked about before. Um, it's it's really, and this is where I would like to also front end this by saying, yeah, not a doctor, and the true brain scientists out there might hear what we say, and please don't be too critical, but there's a lot of science behind this stuff that we know now, with just what we know about sort of the autonomic nervous system, right, and how the body responds to trauma and stress, like repeated exposure to stress, and how that sort of affects our ability or our brain's, operation, i.e., certain things like just um, uh, shortening access, within certain points, or the prefrontal cortex, right, which is really the executive area, coming offline. All those things that influence, right, how we're able to process information and respond to it, right? That's essentially making a decision. Um, and again, that information comes to us through various ways from, I mean, just your basic senses, sight, sound, taste, touch, along with um, prior experiences, right? That's that great phrase that we hear, my training and experience, all the way down to your history, right? Developmental stuff, and then even just to basic needs where your body's sort of homeostasis is at that time. The stuff we talked about before. Everything from sleep, what you're eating, your physical activity, and the idea of decision fatigue is, I mean, your body or your process is stressed enough that it either you're in a space where you're unable to make those decisions, or you're not doing them appropriately or quick enough, or all things that, if you look at, right, what I just said, the right decision at the right time in the right manner, right, that's being a first responder. That's right. I mean, and what's interesting is, as one that lived that experience, that decision, whether in the split second or in the long term, I mean, because of their careers and what they're doing, I mean, that can get looked at, right, you know, two minutes after or 20 years later, or those sorts of things. But we know the science shows that, that repeated exposure to stress and trauma can increase um, uh, the fatigue. That's a great word, fatigue. That makes those decisions harder to make, sort of. And again, that really comes to this idea of the window of tolerance, right? We have an optimal zone, uh, and I'm not a great one to really describe this, but we all have sort of an optimal zone that we operate in, where we are, right, regulated enough that those decisions are, appropriate at the right time, and the right amount.
Mhm.
And that outside of that zone, which again, they obviously describe as a window, right? Up here, again, repeated exposure to stress or trauma. Um, Up here, when you're outside that window of operation, you're in that hyper arousal. That's that hypervigilance, stuff that's, the dysregulated again towards more the higher emotional end, the angry outbursts. Again, stuff that is, we would say, sort of inappropriate to the situation at the time, right? A bad decision.
Mhm.
If you made, I stubbed my toe, and instead of going, "Ow, that hurt," right? I'm cursing and punching a hole in the wall,
Mhm.
right? That's outside of your window of tolerance, right? That's stress or that decision making moment. I exceeded, or I was outside my window of tolerance. And then of course there's down below, there's under, and that's that hypo arousal, which is, um, you know, the reverse. Instead of this sort of extreme on this end, it's the hypoarousal is right. Can't feel anything down, you know, the appropriate reaction of, "Hey, Chris, happy birthday. Here's your birthday cake." And I'm just flat, or even, you know, that negative cognition comes in and I'm, I don't deserve this, right? And just kind of go dark. That's a hypoarousal. Again, it's the decision during that time is not appropriate, right, to that set of circumstances. Um, and that's really the window of tolerance
Mhm.
kind of theory in
So,
relation to decision making.
yeah. So, I mean, as you describe, even just decision fatigue, it seems kind of obvious that this is something our law enforcement, dispatch, parole and probation, like our first responders are especially prone to, understandably, simply because of the work that they do and that they're human. Um, And I think for a lot of them, right, like their ability to remain professional helps with combating that decision fatigue. But then I'm guessing, gets a little more challenging when you get home, right? Um, I don't know, because like for me, when I think about it, at least professionally throughout the day, right? Like I get to the point where I'm just like, nobody asked me anything else. I'm not going to answer another question. Don't ask me to make a decision. Decide for yourself. Like, fend for yourself. You got this. I believe in you. To the point where I'm like, nobody asked me what's for dinner. I'm not deciding. You decide. Or look at the menu for the week. Like, and you can figure this out. Like, it's like you get home and it's like that safe place, where you're just like, no, you can do this. You don't need me.
Yeah, and it's a great personal sort of disclosures, right? But in this world, yeah, we'll have different windows of tolerances, or we'll see them. And what becomes interesting is like you'll have somebody whose window of tolerance out there on the street, right? When they're working is quite wide, right? I mean, people can say and do things to them, and they'll be put in situations and just operate, professionally, unbelievably well. And in fact, if you really look at good training programs, that's what they're doing, right? Is training under stress and pressure and time with provided information and expectations, right? Good training programs are sort of designed to increase someone's sort of window of tolerance, that decision making. And then yet they go home. And all of a sudden that window of tolerance gets really small, right? For a myriad of reasons. Um, you know, and that's and as a therapist, right? As a therapist now that works with first responders, this decision-making fatigue, a great word, I'm sure somebody coined it and they're selling books about it. But it really is why a lot of times, it's one of the main reasons why somebody does end up seeing, first responder does end up seeing is usually because you're starting to hear this feedback, or they are starting to hear this feedback that, either from home, hey, you're kind of being, this, or at work, this is not like me, Chris. I'm normally not like this, right? Um, and you know, and it's an interesting conversation. And one of the things that we always want to lead out with, and just like with your disclosures, everybody's window of tolerance is it's subjective, right? It's subjective, and we start to do that comparative of, well, why is Claire able to handle this, and yet I go home and I can't make a decision, or my spouse is able to think these things, but I go home and I just want to sit because my brain seems to be completely, shut down. Uh,
Hmm.
where we'll see this, and we actually encourage to start limiting decision making is, after like an OIS, or if somebody's in, officer involved shooting, or like a high critical stress incident. You've been in on debriefs, trained in the debrief model. That's what we kind of say is try to limit, you know, any big decision making. Um, After, I mean, I remember after a big deal I was on, young rookie cop, next day, you're off, on the admin leave. And the next day I went out and bought a brand new four-wheeler. That's usually what we see, right? Is, on a rookie cop salary, talk about decision making. We call it retail therapy, right? And then afterwards, when you're making the payments on a rookie salary, you're like, yeah, on a four-wheeler that I think I rode three times in the first year. So, you know, but yeah, you'll see it at different spaces. That window it's not necessarily the same size.
Hmm.
And the work is to have those discussions and do those things that allow us to either increase, like I talked about, just the training aspect, you
Hmm.
know, um, but doing it for home, at home, how do you increase that window of tolerance at home? So you're operating, at a better state to make those right and appropriate decisions, or correct and appropriate decisions at the time. And those things, and I know we've talked about it before, but they sound basic, but it's because they work. The science is there, and that's the stuff. I mean, everything from in the moment, the breath work.
Hmm.
I know right now everybody's sort of returning to that, as we should. It's worked forever. We stole it again from the high level operators, but everything from box breathing, the 4x4, now we're adjusting it, right. Uh, Four in, hold for four, and then blow out for eight.
Hmm.
So the research, right, is showing that you want the exhale to be longer than the inhale. That seems to really increase. Um, we've been doing that for years. Uh, Stuff like the grounding techniques. Um, how do you separate, I think we've gone over before, but how do you separate when you're coming home from work? I mean, how do you really clearly ground out and leave work there, so when you're walking through the door into you're home, right? You're focused, you're able to be present. And that's hard. That's hard with the agencies like we work with. We work with a lot of rural agencies where, your patrol car is parked right out in your driveway, right? I mean, you're coming home and walking through the door still in your uniform.
Hmm.
But there's great grounding techniques. I heard one from a sergeant not too long ago that works in a mid-sized agency, you know, brings his patrol car home and all this. And for him, he pointed out, he's like, my wife knows that I'm home when I take my notebook and I completely close it, and he sets it on a thing by the door. And she says she knows if he's still sort of involved in something, if he comes in and he keeps the notebook, right, his police notebook, and kind of puts it near the bed. And that's kind of their key, that she kind of gives him a little bit of space as his return back home, before it's like, hey, these are the decisions of the day here at the house. I need you to be involved in. But that clearly, that thing where he says, I can see the notebook, and when I close it, I'm just kind of, now I'm home and I set it right here by the door. That's actually a grounding exercise on his part, right? Returning home. Um,
Yeah, that's.
there's the other stuff, meditation.
Mhm.
I know as a former cop and now a therapist, it's amazing what you see when you start to plug in mindfulness, right? I mean, just 5 minutes of focusing on your breathing, 20 minutes of focusing on your breathing. I think it's like three times a week. They can see now that it like extends and helps sort of rebuild that, the parts of the cortex, interior singular, right? Piece that really regulates emotional response, we believe.
Mhm.
Meditation
Mhm.
does seem to increase that.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, sorry. So I interrupted. I kind of
No,
went on
you're good.
long.
You're good.
Yeah.
I love it. I mean, the brain, we know, is a use-based organ, right? There's points in life where it's more highly neuroplastic or adaptive than others, but it is something that we can influence throughout life based on the data or the things that we ask it to do, right? Data input, things that we ask it to do. But no, I
Well,
love.
for those of us Well, and for those of us working more from the resiliency model, I mean, recovery we're pretty good at. I mean, if you're burned out in the decision making and somebody spots it and they, you can get a peer team working with you or even to a therapist. I mean, it sounds bad, but I mean, if we get to it in time, the recovery, we can deal with that pretty well. But
Mhm.
what is beautiful is this idea of all this stuff that we know works on the back end really, really works really much better on the front end. So that idea of like physical activity, I mean, you really want to increase your window of tolerance, right? Stay physically active and be consistent about it,
Mhm.
right? This is gonna the real crunchy therapists are gonna hate me saying this, but also lean into discomfort prior to being burned out. Lean
Mhm.
into discomfort. This idea of, oh, do something self-care that you really enjoy. Actually not really, right? I mean, that's actually after the bad thing has happened. Yes,
Mhm.
self-soothe, right? Talk about
Mhm.
this. But if you want to stave off and expand that window of tolerance, man, discomfort. I mean, the
Yeah.
new thing everybody loves, very effective, cold plunge, right?
Oh,
Or,
cold plunge.
oh, it's right. I mean, it's pretty phenomenal what we're seeing with that. But some people are like, oh, find something you enjoy to do and do it. Get a hobby that challenges you.
Yeah.
I mean, something that makes your brain think. Go get another degree. Go study something. I know a couple cops not too long ago went and got their ham license, now that they're, and I mean, just that challenging sort of thing, right? To make a muscle strong, it needs discomfort.
Hmm.
Right? And I think that might be, and I don't want to get on my pedestal here and start preaching, but that might be some of the problems sometimes that we're facing really right now when we're seeing these high rates of depression and stuff is we've sort of gotten away from that idea that, you should be a little uncomfortable. That helps in the recovery side. So yeah. Um, yeah, sleep. I mean, we know stuff that shrinks that window of tolerance too,
Mhm.
right? Alcohol usage, right?
Mhm.
Some of those addictive behaviors. I'm going to tell you one. You want to, I mean, talk about shrink of window of tolerance, social media.
Oh,
And I don't mean to lie, demonize it, but
no,
man,
demonize it. Okay.
well, I mean, it's a big comparison machine, right?
Yeah.
And it's a dopamine sort of inject and at the wrong times, right? So that is really confusing your body a lot.
Hmm.
And so, as we say, try to limit that or be intentional about your usage of it. Um, so yeah, so those things are
Yeah. Now, what about because like when I think about obviously I can only speak from my experience, right? But I think about decision fatigue and some of the stuff in addition to what you're saying. Um, I think about how do we design a system that makes it so there's fewer decisions to make, right? Is that an option too, to just like help like so for like me like I will create a dinner menu for the month. That isn't the question at the end of the day that I do not want to get what is for dinner. So I will sit down, I'll create a dinner menu for the month, and then everybody knows, and we don't, no one has to make that decision at the end of the day, because in our family no one wants to, we're all tired. No one wants to have to run to the store. So is it helpful to set up systems that when you're going to maybe be in a challenge point to just pull like don't have to make a decision. You've already done it previously.
right. Yeah, 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 it helps. In fact, that's where that word intentionality that I know we've beaten up on these things a lot, but it's just really very important. Um, Intentionality, if you know something's going to come up and it increases those stress points, right, or that repeated exposure. And again, this is where that subjectivity comes in, is because people may be hearing this and going, "Oh God, dinner's stressful, planning dinner." Yeah, right? For people that are working sometimes 40, 50 hours a week, right? Uh, on average, usually a little bit more. Those that may be on call, those that may be, working a night shift, the idea of planning dinner, right, can really be sometimes that straw that breaks the camel's back. So if you identify that it's one of those things, then take it out of the mix as far as, right, it being this sort of stress point that you might react to. Um, and so if everybody needs dinner, it's not like we can't just not start, doing it. So yeah, be intentional about when and where you actually have to face that decision point, right?
Yes.
I
Yeah.
mean, um, And we do that again. We're now looking at this from the resiliency, meaning do it ahead of time. But if you look at it, we've been doing it for years in the recovery portion. I'll go again, like a officer involved shooting, right? That's one of the first things when we work with them, whether it's peer teams or even just leadership or as a therapist, right? I mean, even on the scene, one of the first things, usually appears there, and it's like, okay, uh, let's call your spouse and let them know you're okay. Let's all drive you home. We'll get you home. We'll, start to take those things out that are even seemingly basic decisions, but generally because this person is probably at an overwhelmed point, right? I mean, we kind of just do that. Well, now we're applying it on the front end. I mean, uh, to those things. Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's good. Boundaries, right? We hear about that, right? Learning to say no, those sorts of things, being intentional, but yeah, really designing systems to where yeah, you're making all the decisions at a point when you're safe, you have the energy to do it, and it's not just kind of coming up and grabbing you when you're worn out.
And to be clear, dinner is not stressful. I just
No, no.
I just
Married a long time, raised a family. Yeah, those conversations, right? It's a great example. In fact, I might steal that from you and use it, but right, because then when you start abdicating that decision, again, been there. My wife working full time. I'm a, night shift cop, and we're raising two kids. We get home and it's like, what do you want? Oh, what's for dinner? Oh, and so let's just pick up awesome fast food, and it's a great once or twice, maybe a month, but all of a sudden, chunky Chris Humphreys here rolling out of his patrol car filled with nothing but fries and grease, right? And again, we know nutrition. I think you've done one of these about nutrition, right?
Yep.
You're eating crap, garbage in, garbage out, and Humphreys is now wondering why he's falling asleep in his patrol car at 2 in the morning, well, because you're running on crap. Why?
Yeah.
Because you didn't want to make a decision about what to eat.
And then financially too, like
Oh,
food
dude.
is so expensive.
Yeah.
It's just like, planning it ends up like really being interconnected in so many ways as you're saying, right? So yes, I know everybody faces a lot more stressful things than
Well,
trying
this
to
is this is the number one. I mean, and we might be running long, and I apologize for that. But again, at least in the world I work, doing things to increase your window of tolerance, understanding even what it is, giving grace that everybody's got a different, that it's subjective, and it
Mhm.
can be subjective depending on time and place. But it's probably the number one thing I sort of tend to work with once we get past like trauma and those issues. But even that, as we see, right, it's interlinked, right? And all that's doing is increasing how you interact with your world, right? Whether that world is 900 miles an hour, guns and bullets, or I'm at home, listening to my kids and I'm trying to connect with them. We talk about that. That's a team sport. You want to know a great way to increase your window of tolerance at work or anywhere else is have meaningful connections. But
Mhm.
how do you have meaningful connections if that window is, this narrow?
Yep.
Right. So it is this cool sort of Mobius strip where it's just back and forth. Each one's interconnected, all the way to, now I'm stuffing my face with fries and all I want to do is, yeah. So it's, we don't have the time and I do not have the intelligence or the words to really describe this probably appropriately in a way. But, I would tell you, this is what gets people to retirement, saves their marriages or their relationships.
Mhm.
It keeps their kids from hating them,
Mhm.
right? It makes your life much better. I mean, there again, just sitting your butt down and breathing nice and easy for 10 minutes a day, and that's what's beautiful about it is there are sometimes just very simple fixes to this, small adjustments, right? Over time, we know that learning is cumulative and we call it incremental practice, right? Incremental practice builds, in the long term, substantial gains,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that
Absolutely.
was an impassioned speech. So
Loved it. Loved it. And I also really appreciate your like point about making transitions, right?
mm,
And I think there are clear transitions, especially if like you're putting on a specific uniform when you go to work. Transition points in the day for the like who you are at that point in time. or the role that you're filling, and the idea of like closing the notebook and knowing though if your partner still has that notebook open, oh, they're still in that work mode in some capacity, even though they're here. So even it seems like just knowing that or communicating that, like Mr. Rogers, right? Like his transition point was the sweater. I mean,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
So it's just
yeah.
figuring out and
Yeah. Then
being
there's some creepy doll
intentional.
he's talking to. Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. I'm that generation, right? Yeah.
The puppets. I love
Yeah.
those things. Yeah, so just figuring out what your transition point is to help support like moving from one space to another, one role to another, that grounding that you were talking about. And we link to in our Lighthouse app. So if you have our Lighthouse app, we have a bunch of links in there to free YouTube videos for meditation, whether it's 1 minute or 10 minutes. We've got those. There's breathing practices. So if you're wondering where to start, we link to those things in the app. So check those out. Chris, anything else you want to say before we sign off?
Well, yeah, lots about this. Again, I think it's extremely important, especially, in managing relationships, making your safe at work, being productive, all the things. But yeah, just again, realizing there's so many things that play into this that don't be overwhelmed, but actually look at it as then just a minor adjustment here might have profound effect and, in all the things. So
Hmm.
yeah.
Awesome. Thanks so much for being with us here again today, and we will see you again soon.